honestly, it never would have occurred to me growing up that I was going to go into semi-truck driving at some point in my life. It definitely didn't match my talent or skill in school, and it was not something that I think my parents were particularly excited about. But the reality is that life was very, very difficult at that time, and it was the path that I decided to take in order to save myself. So essentially what happened is I graduated high school in 2013. I actually graduated both high school and college at the same time. So I had my AA degree and my high school diploma at the same time, and then I went to Evergreen State College to get my bachelor's. And while I was in school getting my bachelor's degree, my parents actually started a divorce process. And it was a messy divorce process. I was definitely surprised how both my mom and dad responded to certain situations, and I was surprised at how our religious community responded. And as things just kept being horrible and bad and the house environment felt more and more unstable, I decided that I couldn't follow the plan that I had put in place with my parents, which was to take a year, write some books, and see if I could build up a business with my writing. So I was like, I can't do that. There's not enough support around for me to be able to do that. So I needed to find some way to bring in income and take care of myself. And as I was reaching graduation, I still couldn't figure out which job to get. So I eventually asked myself the question of what job wouldn't I hate? Because that was pretty much the only question that I could ask that made sense to me. I didn't want to do any particular type of job. I'd always had it in my head that I wanted to start a business. I wanted to create things. I wanted to be an influence to the rest of the world, and the only way I could see that happening, the only way I could get my name in history books, was to do something that nobody else had really done before. And while that perspective has shifted a little since then to where I don't actually think I need to be in history books, that was definitely something that motivated me. So the idea of getting a job and working for, X amount of dollars per hour was not something that fit into my plans at all. So I basically had to say, what would I be willing to do for money? What wouldn't I be depressed doing, basically? And the answer that came into my head was driving. I could go become a semi-truck driver. And I was literally 21 at the time. I had just turned 21 the year that I went to semi-truck driving school. I had turned 21 in July of that year, and then October was when the training started. So essentially, I just had a few months, and then I left home, went to Idaho to go to semi-truck driving school for Swift, graduated there in their program. I actually did really, really well. Driving, for whatever reason, has always been really simple for me. Don't ask me to ride a bike, though. I'm horrible at it. So for whatever reason, steering a bike and steering a car is not compatible in my head. And if you're bad at driving and good at riding a bike, apparently the skill set is not interchangeable. But I was actually pretty good at the semi-truck driving. I got a lot of positive comments from my instructors and things like that. And when I did the initial test with my instructors to see if I could pass, I got 100% on that test. Now, I didn't get 100% when I actually did it with the DMV person, primarily because I didn't check my mirrors often enough for him. But all things considered, I did very well. I graduated and I was able to go into semi-truck driving, and then I got on the road. And the first day out, basically, with my mentor, who had never been a mentor before in semi-truck driving, he asked me to park the semi-truck on my own while he went in to take a shower. And that was a decision we both regretted. There wasn't a big issue with that. I happened to scrape another trailer, and the guy in the other truck was not happy about it, and he did decide to report it, which was actually kind of bad luck, because most people who are semi-truck drivers, for example, when something like that happens, they don't typically worry about reporting it. Trailers are generally pretty scratched up anyway, and you don't necessarily know why. It could just be that the yard jockeys, or the yard goats as they're called, are moving the trailers around, and they're not particularly careful about it. But generally speaking, if you get that minimal level of damage, people aren't going to report it because it's usually not worth it. And generally speaking, they're not going to fix it. So it was kind of unfortunate that he decided that he wanted to report that, and that did mean that my mentor and I were not allowed to team drive at any point during our training. So basically, he got to sit on the passenger seat the entire time that we're working together and watch me drive. So I'm sure that was oodles of fun for him, all things considered. But essentially, working with him, we went from Washington State, or actually I went down to California, met him there, and then we went from California over to New York, I believe going the southern route most of the way. And then in New York, during Thanksgiving time or so, we actually delivered to Walmart's, was our primary place there. And while I was in New York, I had my first exposure to the seedy side of male mentality. And so I suppose in some ways I was very protected growing up, because I had no idea that men were like this before going into semi-truck driving, although it still was nowhere near as bad as some of the stories I hear from people. But essentially, I was delivering for Walmart, and then they have a depot over there where the other Swift drivers were. And my mentor basically this entire time had been telling me, like, I will never ask you to sleep with me, like, you don't have to worry about it, so on and so forth. But apparently while we were there, all the other guys in the terminal asked him if he'd slept with me yet, like that's normal. And I was like, wow, I don't feel comfortable around those guys anymore. So it was very strange to me. I mean, you hear all these horror stories about semi-truck driving, and I experienced essentially none of it, which was interesting. Another weird story from that time, though, is that during the New Year's, the day that we were going to the New Year's switch over, I was working with a guy in the simulator, which is something that you do for training to drive in winter conditions and stuff like that. So we were doing a simulator. I was the only girl in the class, basically. And I was talking to this guy about the book that I'd written. So he asked if I would text him the information about the book, and I was like, yeah, sure, I could do that. And then we were kind of chatting, and he's like, well, I don't have any plans for New Year's. Do you want to go get dinner or something? And I was like, yeah, I could do that. I didn't know at the time that could potentially be him hitting on me, but apparently he was engaged to somebody. And I don't know if he intentionally told her or what, or if she somehow managed to intercept the message, but she basically came after me in text saying, you will never ever talk to my fiance again. And to be honest, I was just like, okay then, that's just stupid. Like, if you're that jealous, you probably shouldn't be marrying the guy because you don't trust him. So while I was more than comfortable, doing what she asked, I definitely don't think that's the best basis for a relationship. Maybe he intentionally wanted her to be jealous because it made him feel good. I don't know. Or, like I said, maybe she intercepted his messages. But I was like, wow, okay, I'm glad I dodged a bullet there. So, all things considered, being on the road and driving all over the place for that first 6 months or so was quite intense. But after that, I worked my way back over to Washington, where I ended up switching to a local position, which is something called heavy haul, where we were primarily delivering to Costco's and Winco's. That was the companies we were delivering to. And I gotta say, Winco, if you see this video, stop doing what you're doing with your delivery ports, because they suck. Like, there was this one time I had to do a blind back, and there's a building right over here, and then there's a curb with trees right over there, and there's basically only a one-lane road between the two, and the delivery port is right next to the building, and you don't have enough space in front of the delivery port to fully turn around, so you have to do a blind side back to get into this thing, and you can't come at it from the other direction because you cannot go far enough the other way to be able to back. So you have to do a blind side back, which means you can't see what's going on, and I'm trying to put my trailer between two other trailers in a very precarious position with very little wiggle room whatsoever. So Winco, please change your delivery. Costco is a great example, although Costco, stop putting parking spaces within 100 yards of the places where the semi-trucks need to park their trailers, because I've had any number of cars who decided to park there, and it's like, wow, you just made my life 100 times harder. So be very generous with your space around semi-truck driving delivery places, because all things considered, it is not pleasant at all. But yeah, after I did the heavy haul for a while, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at business again, because in all honesty, I never wanted driving to be my life. And when you go into semi-truck driving, you're working 60, 70 hours a week. You're basically maxing out the amount of time you can spend working as a semi-truck driver, because you're just driving from one location to another, sleeping for 10 hours and then doing it again. So there is very little time to have a family. There's very little time to have any kind of relationships. I missed my best friend's wedding actually while I was on the road, and that's something that I deeply regretted as well. She'd asked me to be a bridesmaid. I'd said yes, and then life took over. You know, I got a job and there wasn't really an opportunity to come back. So I had to miss that, and that's something I deeply regret. So after spending a year basically driving for Swift, I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. Now, there are definitely some things that I was proud of from that experience. I remember one time I managed to park my trailer in a space that literally only had an inch on each side of the trailer, and I did so perfectly without any sort of scratching or denting on the trailer. So I'd come a long way since that first time trying to back a trailer, and I was very, very excited about that, although I wasn't very happy that the yard goat had left no room for me to actually put the landing gear down without crawling under another trailer, so that was not particularly pleasant. But essentially I decided I didn't want to semi-truck drive anymore. I wanted to have relationships, I wanted to have friends, I wanted to be around my family, to be at family gatherings and things like that. So I wasn't willing to just keep doing that job, and the dream had always been to start a business. So I stopped semi-truck driving, and I was living in an apartment for like $400 a month at that point. And so I was working in that apartment trying to build up my writing business, and did not succeed. So then eventually the money started to run out, and I knew that I needed to get another job again. I actually moved back down to live with one of my parents again at that point, and then went into semi-truck driving again at some point. It was probably about a year or so after I initially quit. And that was actually for my kind of stepfather. He wasn't actually married to my mother, he was dating her, but he was a transportation manager at a rendering plant, which is basically a place where you pick up and deliver dead animal parts and bits and stuff like that. So they have deliveries where they're taking, you know, like oil down to farms, and they have positions where you are discarding of the waste material. Izzy, stop. We are discarding of the waste material from restaurants, and then they had positions where you're literally going down to pick up dead animal parts, load them into your trailer, and then drive back up to deliver them to the rendering plant for processing. So it's a very dirty, smelly job. There's a lot of heavy lifting going on and stuff like that, and I actually stayed there for about 6 months working for him until I was actually put into a position that I was not capable of doing physically, which was not exactly an easy job for anybody, I'd say. But you're supposed to maneuver like 400 pounds of dead animal parts, and I just couldn't manage the barrels that they were carried, or that they were put in. So basically somebody was forced to switch positions with me, and I felt bad, and I was like, well, I'm not capable of doing this job physically, so I should probably, you know, give them an opportunity to find somebody else maybe who can actually do this job. Now, to be fair, rendering plant has a lot of turnover anyway, so that may not have been best for them, but all things considered, I was pretty fed up with the job by that point anyway. So, and once again, I was working 60, 70 hours a week. So I was like, well, if I ever want to have anything like a life again, I can't be doing this job. So once again, I quit, and that was essentially the end of my semi-truck driving. And I had a couple more jobs after that point. I had actually a deli job in between the two semi-truck driving jobs, and then I actually went to work as a publishing associate for a family friend of mine for a while. And then COVID hit, and so on and so forth. So that was semi-truck driving, and I can say that there was a lot of good that came out of it. Semi-truck driving was a great way to process through a lot of the emotions that I had around my parents' divorce. It was also a great way to establish my philosophy. I actually had a total breakdown of my philosophy for a while when I was semi-truck driving, and that allowed me the time to work through that and kind of rebuild my belief structures from the ground up. So I call that my Descartes moment, which is a philosopher who basically, he reestablished everything he knew from one simple truth. And for me, the simple truth was God is love. And that's basically where I started with my philosophy. So semi-truck driving gave me that opportunity, and that has changed my life in a really positive way. It has made me the person that I am, and it has allowed me to be happier more times than ever before in my life. And now I have 2 children and a husband because I decided to, live a different sort of life, and life ultimately is pretty good right now. So that is why I went into semi-truck driving, and also why I left. But if you're somebody who wants to have a job where you feel accomplished and capable, and you're okay living your life on the road, I would definitely recommend doing semi-truck driving, because there's a lot of good in it. There's a lot of fun in it. And while the idea of working a 9-to-5 for me has always been somewhat depressing, if you don't struggle with that type of mentality, you'll probably do just fine.